My name's Monk Rowe. I'm very happy to have Ken Peplowski in New York City as my guest. And I would pull a mean one on you and ask for the exact date and location of when we first had an interview. But I won't do that.
Well, wait a minute now. Was it Odessa, Texas?
It was not, but it
Oh.
was sort of like that. It was
Chautauqua.
it was in Aspen
Oh,
23 years ago, almost
wow.
1997. Um, we had just sort of started doing these interview sessions, and I remember that was musically that was a great party. Um, I'm wondering if you could do me a favor for people who will watch this, and if you can think back to 1997 or about then, what a typical, let's say, week or 10-day period for you was like employment, music wise.
Yeah. That the 80s and 90s were really interesting for me because uh there were a lot of different kinds of gigs that I did. Everything from big bands, small groups. There were a lot of big bands still playing in New York. I played in Lawrence Schoenberg's band, a great guy who now is up at the Jazz Museum in Harlem. He had a wonderful big band. We had kind of semi-regular gigs with that band. Mel Lewis was the drummer, and um, I was recording for Concord at that time, traveling quite a bit, which I still am. But in New York, when I was home, I'd play everything from clubs to private parties and functions, so with great bands too. Like there used to be a circuit of jazz oriented, what we call club dates in New York, which is not a club date. It's playing a wedding or a private party. And I always tell people that the first one that I ever did, the band was Mel Lewis, Milt Hinton, Bucky Pizzarelli, Steve Kuhn, and Buddy Tate was the other saxophone player. And here we are playing somebody's wedding,
Oh my God.
and they had no idea, and we're just playing nice tunes, for 4 hours. But that was New York back then. There was you just all these endless circles of players, and it seemed like everything was wide open, and always a new opportunity around the corner, and a very exciting time. And you talk about Aspen, those kind of what we call jazz parties, and if people don't know what those are, it's generally something that takes place in a hotel, a self-enclosed festival, as it were, which kind of centers around one-time only jam session bands. So you'd hire 30 to sometimes 60 or 70 musicians and put together these bands for a one-off with no rehearsal. And there were and back then there was almost one a week. At the very least, you'd play a couple a month. So they were all over the place, always in a hotel, and the musicians and the guests and the audience would all stay at the same hotel.
Well, this leads to an obvious question about what's your life like presently?
I'm watching paint dry, and I'm eyeing my dog and wondering how she would be if I basted her. No, I'm kidding, honey
I,
pie. I'm joking. She's right over there. She may make a cameo appearance, but
no animals will be harmed in the filming of this.
that's right. Yes. Uh, no, I mean it's. I know you've heard this a million times, and we all have, but we've never experienced anything like this, and the musical communities certainly never experienced anything like this, where everything just stopped, and even now, there's no immediate prospects for reopening. It's. I can tell you, I've had most of my major work canceled for the year. Period.
Wow.
So we're all trying to figure out how to forge ahead. and there's so much uncertainty. And I talk to a lot of my musicians. Every day I talk to a few musicians. I've actually cut it down because it's the same depressing conversation over and over, which is, what have you been doing? Nothing. Applying for grants, applying for, relief money, unemployment money. Me personally, I don't have a backup teaching job. I don't live with a spouse or a partner that works. I don't, so that's all I do is play music and travel, and that's gone. And in New York, they've just started phase one. So by the time we're on phase four, the musicians, possibly. So by the time they get to us, it's going to be August at the earliest. And I can't see that anybody has yet figured out how to make it work for venues, clubs, even concert halls yet, because it's such a tricky thing with the social distancing. And there's a place here in New York, Smalls in the Village, where he's started having bands play to an empty room, and he streams the concerts. And it may be that for the foreseeable future.
It's interesting. We're up here in upstate. We're a bit ahead of you, and the restaurants now can have like pavilion seating or semi outside. And we went out for the first time like in 3 months on Friday, and there was a musician playing. And I think the first thing that will come back is just like single acts.
Yeah.
Guitar singers, piano players, and stuff. Oddly enough, we were very aggravated because the guy was playing so loud that the whole thing was. And I had this weird feeling like I should be happy for him.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
Turn it down.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. That's a tricky spot because you don't want to critique him because then, or
Right.
if you say something to the owner, well, then we won't have music anymore. But yeah, it's probably going to be singles and this kind of streaming stuff, which it's one step better than trying to layer instruments one on top of each other. Because as you know, because of quantum physics, we still can't have two musicians in two different places play together with the time delay, even though it's microseconds apart. So the only way around that is to layer one instrument at a time, and that doesn't make for good jazz. Because then, if you start with the rhythm section first, they're just playing a generic accompaniment. It's so. I think at least this is something. If we can meet up in different spaces and play and rely on people's generosity to keep it going, too. That's the other thing is. If people want to even see live jazz down the road, they're going to have to keep supporting all these streaming things, because otherwise you're going to see the clubs fold one by one.
That's a dire prediction. And besides the loss of income, which of course is paramount, how do you feel about yourself right now? I mean, we performers, that's so much a part of what they do. It's like,
Yeah. And I think I've had this conversation with friends of mine. I think sometimes it's hard for a lot of non-musicians to really understand our plight because it's not a job. If you're a musician, it's you. It's your life, and so your income's taken away and part of your being is taken away, really. And for a lot of us, myself included, the first couple of months I didn't even feel like practicing because I talked to Dick Hyman about this too, my friend. I talked to him a couple times a week, and he had the same feeling because it's hard to practice in a vacuum if you don't feel like there's anything to practice for. So I've just started just forcing myself to try to get back into it by practicing. And I've actually I've got a storage room downtown that looks like the last scene from that Indiana Jones movie where they go into that warehouse and it's just boxes stacked on top of each other, all the way up to the ceiling. And I've been going through random boxes and getting rid of things and sifting through. It's nothing but books, uh, recorded music, and sheet music and arrangements. So I'm sifting through sheet music actually to come up with a couple new sets worth of tunes that I haven't played before. Just trying to do something, you know.
Right. With
Yeah,
with the hope that it pays off in the future. I know
yeah.
I have a hard time being motivated. I need a goal with a date on it.
It's true. And like I said, it's nothing against my fellow musicians, but we're all in the same boat, and it kind of doesn't help talking to each other. It helps in the sense that you don't feel you don't take it personally that all this has happened, but it's so depressing because it's the same conversation over and over. You know, nobody's got prospects for work. Even things that are canceled, they're not necessarily rebooking with specific dates because a lot of next year is already booked for concert venues. So they'll cancel you and say, well, we'll talk about 2022 in some undefined future. So it's a weird time. It really is. I can't pretend otherwise. And then you add to that. I know everybody's afraid to talk about politics and things, but you just add to that the social environment on top of that and everything that's going on. And that's just another layer of dark clouds on top of everything else.
It's rather stunning that what is going on all at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's in some of it's connected because I think there is kind of a mass depression and uh, kind of I think this country is going through an upheaval, and we were before this COVID thing started, and but it's brought out extremes in people and extreme reactions, and people are mad and they don't quite know what they're mad about, and uh, it's going to be an interesting time ahead. And I could just I just hope that everybody. All I can say is I hope everybody gets out to vote in November, or mail in their ballots and do whatever it takes because we have to make some changes here. It's just it's a sad situation.
It's hard to imagine that some changes won't be made.
Well, we said that.
He said that.
We said that 4 years ago.
Yeah.
We thought it was a shoe in. Um, so yeah, I okay. Now you've got me going on this. But I tell my friends this. I have this. I sound like a broken record when I talk to my friends because more and more, I really think we live in two different countries in the United States, and it's not. You can't divide it along geographical lines, but we live in, and I think it's been that way for a long time. But the mad king that's in power now has enabled people, given them strength to come forward, with these crazy ideas. But they haven't come out of nowhere, you know, this disbelief in science and basic facts and compassion for your fellow man and I don't care what side of the political fence you're on, but if you're a Republican, and especially the politicians, I don't know how they can live with themselves for supporting this mad king. You know, just this. If you take this, the George Floyd incident, I could imagine any Republican president, either of the Bushes, Nixon, Reagan, they would have tried to heal the country by saying something that brought people together. They would have tried to do something compassionate, But it's like half of the country, we have people that are proud of their ignorance. Uh, they feel like they haven't been heard all these years. They're still fighting the Civil War, really, is what it is. And I don't. It's going to take a long time to sort it out. And I hope, and if we make a change in November, that'll be a big step forward. But we have a long ways to go. We've caused a lot of harm around the world. We've severed a lot of our good relationships around the world. And again, that's going to, not to be to bring it back to me, but that affects all the musicians too, because jazz was always considered kind of a goodwill gesture from America to the rest of the world. And if you remember, they used to send bands out to all these countries, and it's supposed to be the music of freedom and of tolerance, and you don't see ethnic boundaries, you don't see gender boundaries, age boundaries. It's just people play jazz and they don't play jazz,
Right.
So it's going to affect all of us, and when things start to open up again, we could always rely on work in Europe, and I don't know if there's going to be as much of that anymore either.
Wow. Well said. Have you witnessed any of the protests in New York?
Yes, I live up in Inwood, which is the northernmost part of Manhattan. So it's generally pretty quiet here, but there have been some protests in this neighborhood on Broadway that were very peaceful. So, that was a good thing. And yeah, it's the only thing, what I've done, and I actually posted this on Facebook. Again, I wrote a post saying, look, I don't have income for the year, pretty much, but I'm still finding a way to give some money to. I figured the best thing I could do under these circumstances, I gave money to Act Blue and also the Black Congressional Caucus, trying to do something positive, So I think we all have to become activists a little bit, at least, in whatever way you can be now.
Yeah. Thanks
What
for.
about how are the protests where you are?
There's only been a few. They were peaceful. Utica is a fairly small city, so we don't see too much of it. But there's a lot of activism that comes out of the college campuses, of course. And, I work at Hamilton College. And so you'd like to think that this time it's going to make a difference. Sometimes I remember when Sandy Hook happened, I said, this is so awful. It has to make a difference.
Yeah,
Something's going to happen now.
I know. Yeah. Well, I think people have to listen to Barack Obama, who just recently has been stressing the importance of, yeah, you should protest and you should vote. And we've had, not just in the last voting cycle, but probably for the last 30 years. If you go back, you can look at the statistics. Young people, 18 to maybe 24, they just don't turn out to vote, period. And we all say this, you have no right to complain about things. That you can't tell me it doesn't make a difference if you didn't actually vote yourself. So you've got to do it. That's all we have. We've got a democracy here in this country, a supposed democracy. And if you want to keep it that way or make it a more democratic government, that's how it works. You have to vote. You have to put people into positions where they can actually change things. And you can destroy property and you can make yourselves heard, but then you've got to actually do something within the system that we have, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Let me ask you, if amidst all the flurry of cancellations that you got, that you were receiving via email and phone. Did you have a circumstance where someone said to you, well, you can still come if you want? And
Um, no, only one. Actually, one. I had a gig in Switzerland. Um, that would have been in April, and at that point, it was still possible to get there. And the guy was at least 3 weeks out. They were saying, "Do you want to come and do this job?" But I could see that if I went there, first of all, I'd be risking my own health. Second of all, I might be stuck there and not be able to get back for a couple weeks. So I said, no, I don't think this is a good idea. Let's move that somewhere else. That's the only one, actually. The rest just canceled. Now, some, not many, but a few places canceled and then tried to make something up to us by having a streaming event of some sort and getting some money for us. Actually, there's a gig in Pasadena that I was supposed to do at this gourmet restaurant that has jazz. And the guy felt so bad for canceling his whole series. In addition to closing the restaurant, he raised enough money to pay like half a dozen of us pretty well to do a streaming series. And I did it right here, just telling stories and playing a little bit. And I thought that was such a nice gesture, on his part. And
really,
it's good for him too because it keeps the name there out there, and it keeps it's just keeping this music in people's minds.
I could envision a scenario perhaps later in 2020 where someone might offer you a gig you'd have to travel to and bring a couple people with you, and some people may say, no, I'm not ready to do that. You're going to have to make more phone calls than usual if you want to do it.
That's true. Very true. And also, I was thinking about that same thing regarding the clubs that are having musicians show up and get on stage and play to nobody, which is safe for the audience, but not necessarily the musicians. Because if you're a horn player, you're taking the mask off when you play, and you can't social distance that much when you're playing in a quartet in a small club.
Yeah,
So I'm sure there'll be some of that.
right.
But there's also the other factor is how desperate do we all get to that we want to jump back in and play, and then you kind of roll the dice and you say, well, I've been healthy. Let me take a chance. I actually did that. I took the antibody test.
Oh,
And as it turns out, I tested positive. So I probably had the thing, and we don't know for sure. Which they still don't know if it means you have a resistance to it or not, but you might have, which is good news. So
it used to be sort of a joke that making a living in jazz was a dangerous thing.
yes, that's right.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's going to be. I'm thinking about New York just opened up this week, and there was an article in the Times saying the offices they're going to have to jump through hoops, supposedly, to be able to work in the office. They've got to fill out a questionnaire every day, saying, have you been exposed to anybody with the virus in the last 2 weeks? All this stuff. Then they're going to take your temperature. I mean, I can't imagine that they're going to keep that going for a couple of weeks because that's going to, and how are you going to do that in a club or a restaurant with people constantly coming and going? And I don't know. It's figure this out, Monk, will you?
wait, well,
Sort
wait,
it out.
wait till you go get a haircut.
I
And
know. I need one actually.
I finally got one, and the hoops they have to jump through, and like that, they test your temperature first. Like it's
Really.
bizarre.
Mm.
It's
So was the person wearing a mask that gave you the haircut?
and they, as much as we like Cuomo, most of us anyway. I mean, he seemed to have acted like an adult. But
Yeah.
some of the business owners are aggravated at the 30 pages of requirements that they're dealing with to open up. So there's
Yeah.
no there's no good answers, and currently the colleges are trying to figure out what to do. And
What is yours doing?
the last I heard, they're planning on the students coming back with some big changes yet to be determined.
Hmm.
And faculty may not want to come back. They have to give the faculty the choice of teaching on campus or off.
Yeah. I
So
was also thinking, I have a couple of students that are want to go to college next year, and it's such a strange time because do you pay for housing? Do you don't know what's going to happen.
mhm.
It's so late in the day really to make a decision like that.
What if they ask you about going into music for a career?
Well, I encourage it. I mean, I just tell them, look, this is a time that we've never experienced before, but uh, my own experience, I've only played music for a living since I was 11 years old. That's all I've ever done. So I think I think I always tell students the same thing. Half the battle is wanting it bad enough. And like we were talking about earlier, deciding that it's not just a job, so it's not something you do and then you'll do something else to fall back on. You have to decide you're a musician. I want to play music. I'm willing to have good years and bad years and do whatever it takes to get on the scene. And then you have a very good chance at making it happen. But
Mhm.
you have to be all in. And now it's maybe hard for them to envision this, but this will pass. We'll figure things out. I don't know. I watch Bill Maher's show. I don't know if you do, but I watch it, every Friday, and he keeps saying, I think he's of the opinion that we should have done like Sweden did and uh, just use common sense and then go back to work because the past pandemics, nobody, we didn't have lockdowns like this and a similar number of deaths. And then he said, people, the statistics of people that die of infections in hospitals is also 100,000 a year, and nobody talks about that.
Oh,
But what I would argue about that is we've had 100,000 deaths because we did the lockdown. And if we hadn't, we might be at 500,000. So I think this pandemic is probably worse than any we've ever seen. And as much as painful as it is for all of us, I think it's something we have to do. You know, here in New York, and maybe it's the same where you are, uh, so many people are walking around outside just hanging around in groups and no masks, nothing. And I don't understand that because it doesn't kill you to wear that mask, and every epidemiologist, nobody disagrees on that. It's not even a thing that's debated yet. Everybody's saying you still should wear them when you're outside to protect yourself and to protect other people.
have you had any thoughts about why the pandemic occurred? Besides, we can trace it to one city or something, but I'm wondering if you think there's something larger going on.
Well, I do think this is related to climate change because um, that's most of these major outbreaks. The Ebola thing happened too because you cut down the trees, you cut down the habitats, and a virus needs a host. So it jumps to the next species to stay alive. It makes kind of an evolutionary leap, and this is not based on hearsay. That's pure science and empirical evidence, and uh, I think we're going to see more and more of these extremes as we go on. And you know, um, there were all kinds of stories in the papers about the first 2 months. The carbon dioxide was down. The air quality was so much better, and now it's almost right back up again as things are opening up. And it's like we're so selfish as a species. We just don't care.
Mhm.
We're gonna kick this can down the road and let somebody else deal with it. And I just that there again you go. It's two countries, maybe two different worlds. You
Yeah.
know, there's people that believe in, as I said before, empirical evidence in everything in life. That's all you can go on. Is a preponderance of evidence, and until you're proved wrong. And then there's people that are just deniers and want to believe crazy alternate realities. But what do you think about this?
Well, I think you can't, this sounds like a, much used phrase, but you can't mess with Mother Nature for too long. And I think nature always had a way of saying there's too many people, there's too much of this, and something happens because of that. Uh, that's about as far as I've got with that.
Yeah, right.
It's very interesting. I was reading a book about Pops Foster,
Yeah.
and he's talking about playing on the Mississippi River boats in 1918. And then he said, just in passing, and we had to take a few months off because of this flu thing,
Ah,
right? He's talking about the Spanish flu was like
yeah.
really struck me as this, it's coming
Wow.
or something.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Is that his autobiography, that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll send you the title. It's a great read.
Yeah, I think I missed that one. I've got to read that.
Yeah.
I love those oral histories like that. I love those.
Yeah. Any upside for you personally? Anything you've taken up as a hobby or?
Well, I mean, I've always loved books and movies. So I'm reading a lot right now. Every day, I actually take an hour at least and read, and um, I read all kinds of things, fiction, nonfiction, and I'm also a fan of the old humorists, Robert Benchley, S.J. Perelman.
Mm.
So I've been going through my S.J. Perelman books and reading those because they still make me laugh, and Lord knows we need that. And I'm watching a lot of classic movies that I've had over the years that I haven't gotten around to watch, and
Uh,
uh, and I've got a girlfriend. She lives in Jackson Heights, and so we're meeting up now once or twice a week, and she'll come over. Like last Saturday, we watched a Hitchcock movie. We watched the one with Cary Grant and Grace Kelly.
by North.
No, To Catch a Thief.
Oh, oh.
Yeah, is that the name of it? Uh, it's on the French Riviera, and he's a cat burglar.
And
But it's
you,
so that I've been doing that, and I walk my dog, Honey Pie. We go out a lot, and I've been learning, like everybody else. I've been having to cook, and I've been eating very healthy actually. And my girlfriend is vegetarian and not militant about it at all. She doesn't care what I eat,
mhm,
but I've been leaning in that direction,
yeah,
and I lost 20 pounds. Been going for long walks with my dog, and I feel really good.
that's great because most
Uh,
people go the other way with the adding.
yeah, yeah. So in that sense, that's my like all those things give me some kind of calm center. Uh, so, and then trying to just in the last week or two, there's been little bits here and there of trying to book things for the future. People contacting me and me reaching out to others, which hasn't happened in the last, when this started. There was just no talk of anything. So, but let me ask you, what are you doing? Uh,
Oh, I'm able to do, the Jazz Archive project is like a half-time job for me at Hamilton. I'm working from home like 90% of the college employees. Um, Gigs, I played one gig in the last 75 days.
Mm.
And that gig, I felt like maybe I shouldn't be playing this. It was
Uh,
an odd feeling.
uh,
Um, but I'm pretty much the same as you. I'm an avid reader, and I have a dog who gets three walks a day now.
right.
And my wife is busy making masks for our children and grandchildren.
Uh,
So I wish I was a little more motivated to, I kept thinking, well, I got all this time. I'm going to listen to every Cannonball Adderley LP that I have, which is a lot.
mm.
And I haven't made much progress with that. It's hard to get motivated when you don't really have a goal, at least.
Yeah, I
So,
know. I could tell you one thing. My dog, this, because I share custody with my ex, with my dog, Honey Pie. So when I'm traveling, she gets the dog. So this is the best time of her life. To her, this is the greatest thing that ever happened. She's so happy. She has me 24 hours a day.
well, that maybe is a good up note to wrap up on. And you have anything else you'd like to?
Send money?
Ken Peplowski, Upper Manhattan.
No, we're that's right. It'll get to me. Don't uh, no, I mean, people can look on my Facebook site, and I'm doing some streaming stuff like everybody else, and I might actually start a series because I had a lot of positive things. I did this one for this club restaurant in California, which is just me sitting here telling dumb stories from the past and playing a little bit, just kind of, and playing songs that related to the anecdote that I told, and people really loved it. So I might do kind of a weekly or bi-weekly thing
Yeah.
on that. So
Well, I'm going to stop our recording and then we can just wrap up and say goodbye.
sure,
Thank you.
thanks.